people need a narrative to their life and some meaning to it. And when times are tough, we go back, even 200 years before, mortality rates of kids and stuff started to drop and so forth. And your meaning in life was defined in large part by staying alive and keeping your kids alive, and wasn't even always successful then. So you really, life forced you to have a narrative for yourself and a focus and a meaning in life. Because if you didn't, you just weren't going to make it. And now a lot of those hardships have been stripped away. As a result, a lot of people are lost. It's like, well, what do I do? I mean, there's no reason for me to kind of be here. I mean, people have to create some sort of narrative for themselves, some purpose. Life being too easy is not always the best.
David C. Geary, cognitive developmental and evolutionary psychologist at the University of Missouri. Carneus Parda. My name is Biz, B-I-S. I'm a journalist from the world of artificial machines with the goal of investigating human natural intelligence. Hi, let's get started. 1. Tell me an example of human intelligence happening.
I think of intelligence as the ability to adapt to and solve novel problems, rather than kind of using overlearned strategies for dealing with some type of issue, whether it's a human issue, technical issue, or whatever. You're trying to understand the problem and come up with a solution for it. I think a great example now is the development of the vaccine for COVID-19. There's a problem to solve. And how can we quickly solve this problem by taking what we know, adapting it in however we need to this current context?
2. Tell me an example of a lack of human intelligence happening.
Well, many, many examples of that. If we take the ability to think through, understand, and problem solve in a novel context, then the antithesis of that would be reacting to something, perhaps emotionally, based on more limited information, and coming up with a non-optimal solution or decision. So a good example of that is something related to what cognitive scientists call the availability heuristic. So you make judgments and decisions about a particular context or issue or whatever based on how many examples you can remember of that happening to you and your emotional reaction to those examples. If there's a lot of media coverage, for example, of a plane crash, then people, understandably react to that, particularly if a lot of people are killed in the crash. They emotionally react to it. And it's something memorable because it has a negative emotional tag to it. And then we ask people after that, what are the chances of ending up in a plane that crashes? And the actual chances are extremely low based on this negative emotion and the accessibility of this memory. And it's actually an artificial memory because it didn't actually happen to them. They saw it on a screen. People make decisions that are not consistent with actual risks.
3. Definition of intelligence.
I understand intelligence as the ability, as I said before, to cope with novelty and variation and change in your circumstances, whatever they might be, to mentally represent that variation and change and come up with a solution. So intelligence would then be the ability to cope with things that you haven't fully dealt with before. So there's some type of uniqueness or novelty to it, and the ability to come up with a solution to that novel problem that moves you forward or takes care of the problem, or at least makes it less of a problem than it once was. There are a lot of arguments about how intelligence evolved in humans as well as in other species, but common across all of the different models, and I'll elaborate a bit here in a bit, is having to cope with changes in your environment. So you have different seasons. If it's during the fall, you have to think ahead and prepare for winter, or you have very complex social dynamics, which are never completely predictable. Different theories have focused on climatic change, where you're moving into a new ecology or the ecology is changing, and those individuals that could adapt their foraging habits or adapt their use of tools, if they use primitive tools or whatever, to adjust to these climatic or ecological changes, would be considered more intelligent, more likely to survive these changes, and whatever ability allowed them to kind of come up with novel solutions kind of gets passed on. I think something like that happened during our evolution. But I think with people also, there's an important social component to it. So if we go back to the Australopithecines, if we go back 4 million years or so, we look at brain size, and that's modestly correlated with what we would call intelligence. We see it was fairly stable for a long time and then started going up. And so something was changing in the environment that kind of pushed brain evolution. And some people have argued, well, it started to get colder or warmer or whatever, that changed the ecology and so forth. One problem with that is other primates that lived in the same ecologies did not have this rapid increase in brain volume. They stayed the same, or they got only slowly going on. So something special happened to people. And I've argued, and other people have argued, that an important component of that is social competition, outwitting other folks, or, organizing your communities in ways that allow you to better take advantage of agricultural opportunities, to defend yourself against competing groups, to develop new tools. As you're moving along there, you're creating a lot of evolutionarily novel stuff, things that didn't exist before. So you work and you work and work, and eventually figure out a good way to make a particular weapon or a particular agricultural tool or whatever it is. Could have taken generations for people to refine that. And then the current generation doesn't have to rebuild it, but they do have to understand how to use it, how to make it, and so forth. So they have to learn about this new technology that didn't exist 3 or 4 generations previously. And because it didn't exist 3 or 4 generations previously, there's not enough time for evolution to have built-in biases to make it easy to learn this new technology. And so we have to use our, what we would call intelligence, your ability to kind of conceptually understand how a tool works, how to, adapting your spatial abilities to figure out how to make it correctly, how to use it, how you would organize groups.
4. Subjective experience of your own intelligence.
Yeah, I think from a broader issue, the question is, where does self-awareness come from? And that's a great question. I don't know that we have an answer to it. But in one of my books, Origin of Mind, I argued that self-awareness evolved as a component of this dynamic social competition. I propose that self-awareness comes into play because if you are aware of your own personality, your own biases, likes, dislikes, and so forth, you can, it gives you a couple of advantages. One, you could better understand your own weaknesses. And these are weaknesses that other people might use to manipulate you. So you're aware that, I often I get emotional about things, and I often fall for these arguments when I'm upset. If you're aware about that, you say, okay, well, I'm not going to make any decisions when I'm upset about something or super happy about something or whatever, because I make mistakes there. Or you can say, well, I'm extroverted and so forth. And so if I go into this field and try this sort of thing, I'm probably going to do pretty well. Once other people start to understand your idiosyncrasies, which they can then use to manipulate you or help you or whatever as part of these social dynamics, there has to be a counter to that. And self-awareness is that counter, I think.
5. What makes humans intelligent beyond other animals?
The seeds of what we call intelligence are there in other primates and probably there in other species as well. And what we've done is kind of moved further along the continuum than any other species. And I think the best explanation for that, as I said before, is this social competition, which would drive us away from other species, because other species have to deal with getting food, avoiding predators, dealing with ecological change, but they don't have to deal with other people. And we do. Humans do a lot of social comparisons. So they compare themselves to their peers, for example, if they're college students, compare themselves to other college students and how are they doing relative to their peers. People compare themselves on income, where they live, all sorts of things. So people are highly sensitive to how they're doing relative to how other people are doing and where they are in kind of a social hierarchy, whether they want to admit it or not. And that's exactly the type of bias we would expect if intelligence was driven by a lot of intense social competition. So you have this social comparative sort of thing. So you might be doing fine in absolute terms, but if your neighbor seems to be doing better than you, it's a source of, could be a source of jealousy or resentment or envy or whatever it is. Intelligence is now more important than probably it's ever been, because the ability to do well in a modern, highly developed economy and society is more and more dependent on the ability to learn evolutionarily novel things, to do well in school, to learn mathematics, to read, learn science, understand literature, and so forth. So the ability to kind of do well in a school setting is important for achieving certain educational credentials, going to college, getting skills in college and then on the job and so forth. Intelligence makes all of that easier. They've always had somewhat of a competitive advantage, but I think the extent of that advantage has been going up as societies become more and more complex and more dependent on evolutionarily novel educational learning. And that advantage translates into occupational advantages later on, mostly due to educational credentials. But even within occupations, it makes a difference. And those occupational differences lead to socioeconomic, monetary differences. You live in better communities, better households, bigger houses, whatever it might be. It provides numerous advantages. And that's why people get touchy about it.
6. How relevant is the body?
I think what we don't fully understand yet is the contributions of the microbiome. So our diet, what we eat, so forth, there's all sorts of gut bacteria in there that are producing all sorts of proteins that are used throughout the body, including the brain. And there's pretty good evidence that nutritional shortfalls during development will stunt growth, physical growth, and stunt brain maturation, and will probably lower IQ. Our bodies and brains have evolved for a certain type of diet. We have the gut bacteria that produce these proteins that aren't produced in other ways. This is going to contribute to some extent to aspects of brain development, and it's kind of evolved to expect these proteins and these numbers. And then we have a change in diet, more economically advanced, kind of a Western type diet. It's not the most healthy, and we don't really know fully how that change from kind of the evolved type of diet to a less healthy Western diet is affecting brain development and possibly intelligence during development, and also changes with cognitive aging. As people get older, they lose some cognitive abilities, but some people lose them more rapidly than others. And part of that is related to things like diabetes, which causes inflammation and all sorts of things. And maybe poor diets and other things can affect the rate of change as well. I've argued that anything that can disrupt mitochondrial production or energy production during development or in adulthood can potentially compromise intelligence and cognition. So you have this kind of maximum potential. If you're not getting enough nutrition, your mitochondria are in poor health, whatever, you're going to be somewhere below that potential.
7. How can I tell someone is intelligent and not faking it?
Just probably an easy way to do that would be to look at the person's vocabulary and general knowledge. So ask them questions about a variety of things, and just pick a whole variety of things: history, science, math, and so forth, or just general social knowledge, and see how much they know, and give them some easy vocabulary words and some more arcane words. See what they know. That's usually pretty highly correlated with kind of estimates of intelligence.
8. How can humans increase their intelligence?
I don't know if increasing intelligence is there. You can certainly do things to maximize your ability. A good childhood without stressors, disease, nutritional wants, and so forth is going to be good for your kids. As you get older, taking care of yourself physically will, not gaining too much weight, avoiding diabetes and other kind of things that create chronic inflammation and so forth, will slow cognitive aging. So help you maintain your cognitive abilities for longer periods of time. You can also improve the appearance of your intelligence just by reading, knowing more, improving your vocabulary, stopping and thinking about things and different alternatives rather than responding to your memories and your emotions to things. Play is common in mammals and some other species. And, there's arguments about it, but it is, in a sense, practice for the types of skills that we would need, or at least our ancestors needed, to do well in adulthood. So for kids, there is different types of play. There's object-oriented play, figuring out how objects, rocks, sticks, or whatever, it can be used to make tools. And so that kind of gives you a sense of how the physical world works. There's play of exploration of the environment, and that there are actually brain systems that remember locations in your environment and so forth. That's good for navigation. A lot of the play, however, is social. So there are social dynamics. You join groups. If you're boys, you're probably in a fairly big group. You figure out where you're going to be in the social dominance hierarchy. You figure out how to coordinate your behaviors with the behaviors of other boys in that group, which typically makes that group more competitive vis-a-vis another group. Could be in sports. In terms of evolutionary history, it's probably male-on-male violence, group level competition. The environment has changed. Culture has changed. And as I said before, we now live in an environment, an economic system, and so forth, where doing well in academic activities, reading, writing, math, so forth, becomes increasingly important. Was absolutely unimportant for our ancestors. Even going back a few hundred years, you didn't have to have that much education to do well in life. But that's changed. And that kind of cuts into playtime, because playing with your friends and doing kind of normal play activities won't teach you to learn to read and write or do math. And that's where kind of schooling gets in there. So there's this tension between having to be prepared for an evolutionarily novel, highly technologically, economically complex new environment versus our old biases to engage in a lot of play. Is absolutely critical, but can't be the only thing. There has to be this schooling aspect to it as well.
9. Positive impact of artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence and a lot of computer-driven technologies have been very good at learning things. People programming programs to do things that are evolutionarily novel, like multiplication, division, And so those can be used to make our lives easier in a lot of sense. They can offload. Whether it'll ever get to the point where it can engage in novel problem solving in the same way that people do, I don't know. People have kind of this strategy for that and this strategy for that. And the AI algorithms are good at mimicking these strategies for doing this and doing that. People who are intelligent can say, okay, there's something similar across these two strategies. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine them in a way that allows me to do more than either of those can do together. And whether AI systems eventually hit that, I don't know.
10. Negative impact of artificial intelligence.
One negative impact is going to be a lot of lost jobs. Automation, is going back for quite some time. You automate things, you make things, weaving, for example, you make it more efficient. Anything that can be done kind of at a routine level, you do this, then you do that, then you do this. And if this happens, you do A or B or whatever. Anything that can be done that way could be taken over by our artificial intelligence. And then what happens to the displaced people? We don't know. I mean, the economy might change, the culture might change in a way that, allows them to do something else. But on the other hand, it might just create a large underclass that is disenfranchised and unhappy with their situation. And that is not good for any society. People need a narrative to their life and some meaning to it. And when times are tough, we go back, even 200 years before, mortality rates of kids and stuff started to drop and so forth, and life, it became really easy. Your meaning in life was defined in large part by staying alive and keeping your kids alive, which required a lot of effort, a lot of focus. It basically organized the lives of both men and women and wasn't even always successful then. So you really, life forced you to have a narrative for yourself and a focus and a meaning in life. Because if you didn't, you just weren't going to make it. And now a lot of those hardships have been stripped away by modern conveniences, modern society, artificial intelligence contributes to it, and so forth. And so I think as a result, a lot of people are lost. It's like, well, what do I do? I mean, there's no reason for me to kind of be here. I mean, people have to create some sort of narrative for themselves, some purpose in their life. Otherwise, they're going to be miserable. And if there's enough of them, there's going to be social chaos. And life being too easy is not always the best.
11. Natural and artificial intelligence by 2050.
I think we'll still have 2 ears and 2 eyes. And 2050 is not that far away. That's just a generation or so. So there's not going to be that much change for natural selection. As I said, artificial intelligence is moving. It's moving fairly rapidly. And I think, as I said, the biggest thing it's going to do is displace a lot of people and people's employment, their niche in society, and so forth, especially for guys, is a very important part of their identity and their purpose in life. They kind of understand where they fit in the world, and what they're doing is socially valued, socially important. It really gives it a psychological benefit to the individual, but also helps the individual cooperatively fit into the larger society. And so if things develop to the extent that we have more and more people with no place in the world, we're going to have more and more psychological problems, but I think also more and more social problems. Some people have argued that, and there's debate. Some people have argued that humans are kind of like what are called eusocial species, like ants, where they're, your workers, you have the fighters, you have the queen, and so forth, and it works as a hive and a community, and everybody kind of does their thing. I actually don't think that's a good analogy, but it is something a little bit similar in nature. Humans are self-serving, of course, but they've also evolved to be very cooperative. And cooperation is critical for any large community and any large society. Where you have more cooperators are going to have advantages over groups where everybody's infighting with one another. The sense of cooperation, though, is facilitated by having common ground, common goals, common ideological belief, whatever that belief system might be. And if that is all shared, people get along pretty well, and you have the division of labor and all of that sort of thing that works. In some cultures, that's kind of, as life gets too easy, there's no real threats out there, you lose a lot of that cohesion because you don't really need the cooperation of, 10 or 20 other people to get your water or to get your food or to protect yourself. You get the police to do that. You turn on the faucet to get the water. And so as life becomes easier, wealthier, and so forth, and threats are reduced, there's a tendency for the cooperativeness to dissolve a bit and the self-interest to express itself more, which undermines social functioning, social dynamics, can collapse empires. People have certainly been great at kind of dominating the ecology, creating rooms and heaters and air conditioner, whatever, to maintain a comfortable environment, sheltered from predators, all sorts of things. And that reduces your ability to have to, or your need to have to think about these things. So it makes life easier in that way. But if people are really part of the equation, the need for cognition and thinking and intelligence, and we're socially competitive, then that part of the evolutionary pressures never goes away. I mean, it's like, so you have $1 billion, you don't need anything. You're fine. You're set for life. But I would bet a lot of those folks are comparing themselves to other people like them, other tech billionaires and so forth, thinking, well, this guy's making more than I am. And his company's doing better than mine and so forth. And so there's still that competitive pressure, the ability to kind of outthink and outwit this other group, when in absolute terms, it's completely unnecessary. But that's not what typically happens. People stay engaged and stay competitive.
12. What would you suggest me to better understand humans?
It's often difficult to understand people because we're designed to interact with them on the here and now. We have evolved biases, emotional reactions, and so forth. And you can get along in life without ever thinking about why people do X the way they do, or why they do Y the way they do, or how did they come to do that. Because a lot of what we do is kind of automatic, built in, so forth. We don't have to think about what somebody smiling means. We just have a reaction to it. And we might think a little bit, are they really happy or not, or whatever. If you want to understand people more, you have to step back a little bit and think about, what was the purpose of this? Now we step back. We're thinking, well, my friend said this and she had this facial expression or whatever. Is she upset at me, or what was she thinking? We do a lot of those things. But what we don't do is take it at the next level above and think about, well, why am I so concerned that my friend might be upset with me? And you say, well, you could lose the friendship. Say, okay, well, I can lose the friendship, but why do I need this friend to begin with? Or why do I need any friends? Because they make demands on you. There's always costs to relationships. And you think, well, what happens without friends? Well, you lose social support, you lose emotional support, and other sorts of things. So you can begin to think about, okay, I can see why I have friends. And then the way I do it anyway, you think about, okay, what are the conditions in which we need social and emotional support? And those are conditions that create hardships. Okay, what are those hardships? What would have led to that? Dealing with food shortages and have cooperation, of course, but dealing with other individuals, other people have different competing needs and so forth. So somebody's mean to you and upset and so forth, and having the social support system then allows you to better cope with and understand the social dynamics.
Thank you for your collaboration. Goodbye.